Welcome to a note found in an 1841 plantation ledger from Colleton County, South Carolina. The entry is brief, buried between crop tallies and weather reports. It reads, "Small parchment discovered beneath floorboard, drawn with charcoal figures of rivers and cabins, no words, no names." There is no date beside it, no signature. The handwriting trembles slightly, ink pooled at the start of every word as if written in haste. It was the only entry under unusual findings. The parchment itself has never been recovered. Archivists describe the ledger page as warped and damp-stained, its fibers swollen by humidity, its edges rough with age. The words appear pressed deeply into the paper, as though the writer bore down too hard. When viewed under raking light, faint curves appear behind the ink-thin arcs, bending like water channels. They could be creases, or they could be something drawn beneath the surface. A week later, a letter appears in another archive. It is dated May 12, 1841, written by a woman named Ada Sims, a teacher living 2 miles from the Latimer estate. The handwriting is clear, polite, the kind used for school lessons. She writes, "3 children came by my cabin door barefoot and silent. One held a folded scrap. They asked for directions to the river, though they lived not far from it. I told them to go home before dark. They thanked me and left toward the woods." The scrap she described was never seen again. The plantation ledger records their absence a few days later. 3 missing from the quarters presumed taken. The line is shorter than the rest, squeezed between longer notations. The next page resumes with "weather rain along riverbanks, mild wind, fair yield expected." No further mention of the children appears in the remaining pages. The paper moves on. The people do not. In June of that year, the Charleston Courier published a small notice near the bottom of its 3rd page. 3 Negro children unaccounted for at Latimer Estate presumed lost to river flooding. No illustration, no update. A single column inch of ink that fades before it reaches the fold. The following week, the Edisto overflowed its banks, erasing footprints washing through the cabins. By July, the report was forgotten. Nearly a century later, in 1937, a field worker for the Works Progress Administration recorded the testimony of an elderly woman in Walterboro, South Carolina. Her name in the transcript is Rebecca, the surname partially smudged by a thumbprint. She said, "We made maps grown folks didn't understand. We draw where the songs go. When the moon was right, the lines would lead you to singing." The recorder, a man named Joseph Billings, wrote a note in the margin. Subject began to hum. "Possibly wade in the water." Recording ends abruptly. The original wax cylinder is still housed in the Library of Congress, labeled simply Edisto Field Tape Fragment. The sound, though degraded, remains faintly audible. A rhythm emerges, 4 beats, 3 beats, then silence. The catalog description identifies it as unidentified tonal pulse. But when compared against a digital reproduction of the 1841 ledger page, the indentation lines and the waveform of the hum follow an almost identical curve. No one ever connected these pieces formally. The ledger, the letter, the song, 3 isolated relics scattered across time, yet all repeat the same pattern, drawing river disappearance rhythm. Facts stitched by coincidence or perhaps by memory. The plantation site today lies under a floodplain. The soil is soft, the air thick with cypress rot. Locals say when the water rises at dusk, you can still hear a hum near the edge of the trees, not wind, not animal, something slower. A pulse beneath the surface, steady, patient. They call it the children's map. No record confirms it. No historian explains it. It exists only in the space between ink and silence, between testimony and loss. Every attempt to define it ends where the sound begins. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from and the exact time you paused. What did you feel in that silence? The ledger that mentioned the parchment was first cataloged in 1928 inside the private papers of historian Sarah Pinckney Holmes of Charleston. It had been purchased from a local family claiming descent from overseer John H. Latimer, who once managed the Latimer plantation on the lower Edisto River. The volume was bound in brown calfskin, its spine cracked, its pages warped by moisture. On the title page, written in a hand not belonging to Holmes, appear the words, "Ledger, 1839 to 1843, Rice and Miscellaneous." There is no mention of drawings, no annotation of mystery. The single curious entry, "Small parchment discovered beneath floorboard, drawn with charcoal figures of rivers and cabins." No words, no names, lies buried among crop records and rainfall logs dated simply 1841. When Holmes first reviewed the ledger, she described it briefly in her index notes. Economic records, fair condition. One unusual marginal note, unclear purpose. She did not highlight the parchment further. It was only after her death in 1931 that the item entered public archives as part of the Holmes Collection HC 21117 at the South Carolina Historical Society. Conservators restored it twice in 1947 and again in 1984, replacing the spine but keeping the paper untouched. When photographed in 2003 for digitization, technicians reported faint curved impressions beneath the ink marks not made by handwriting but pressed from another surface. Under angled light, the indentations resembled channels shallow and winding like the trace of a river bending through the page. The plantation itself no longer stands. The Edisto Basin swallowed most of its remains long ago. Archaeological surveys in 1978 recorded traces of foundation stones, brick fragments, and scattered ironwork. A later soil analysis found high carbon residue consistent with repeated burnings. No artifacts of domestic life were recovered. The site lies now beneath swamp grass, invisible except by satellite. The river continues to shift year after year, eroding and remapping its own banks, as if redrawing what had once been buried. The ledger remained unremarked for nearly a century. It was rediscovered in 1962 by Charles M. Rivers, a graduate intern conducting a survey of antebellum bookkeeping styles. Rivers typed a full transcript noting in the margin entry of interest reference to small parchment under floorboards, possibly household note or child's plaything. Phrase no words repeated twice by overseer. Purpose unknown. He ended his comment with a question mark. The microfilm copy of his transcript still exists, his pencil strokes faint but visible through the scanner. The first connection between this entry and any oral account emerged from a separate archive, the Federal Writers Project of the 1930s. In Box 41 of the South Carolina WPA Field Reports, researcher Joseph A. Billings recorded a series of interviews in 1937 near the town of Walterboro. His focus was the memories of elderly freed people who had lived through slavery and Reconstruction. Among his transcripts, one file stands apart: Rebecca surname, illegible, age 94. The text contains an unusual statement. We made maps grown folks didn't understand. We draw where the songs go. When the moon was right, the lines would lead you to singing. The report ends abruptly. Beneath it, Billings adds a single line. Subject began to hum softly, melody not identified. The wax cylinder preserving that session survives today in the Library of Congress audio reference LC-SC 1937-41. The recording quality is poor. A layer of static obscures most of the voice, but at 00:47 seconds, a low pulse appears, 4 beats, 3 beats, then silence. Archivists classified it as background interference. When digitized in 2010, spectral analysis revealed symmetrical spacing between the beats too regular to be environmental noise. The catalog retained its neutral language, unverified tonal sequence. Billings submitted his last field report in August 1938. 2 years later, on May 17, 1940, he disappeared while traveling the same route between Walterboro and Charleston. His government-issued Plymouth sedan was found parked near the Edisto River Bridge. The driver's door was open. His recorder and notebook were missing. The official memorandum issued by the Works Progress Administration reads, "Field worker presumed drowned during flood. Investigation closed. His remains were never found. The bridge was later replaced, the site unmarked." This detail, the vanishing of a man who once recorded another's memory of disappearance, remains one of the few human constants in a record otherwise built on silence. His missing notes would have contained the full transcript of Rebecca's song, the details of her age, her birthplace, perhaps even her relation to the Latimer estate. Without them, the connection remains theoretical. The Holmes Ledger and the WPA Field Report exist in separate institutions catalogued decades apart, yet their patterns mirror each other. Both record a small act of creation, hidden under domestic life. Both end without closure. The ledger loses the parchment. The interview loses its final verse. Each leaves behind an imprint, one on paper, one in sound. In 1987, a graduate student named Maria Evans at the University of South Carolina was the first to suggest that the two fragments might describe the same phenomenon. She presented a short paper at the State Historical Symposium under the title Children's Cartography and Memory in the Low Country. The surviving abstract reads, the oral phrase, drawing where the songs go, may reflect mnemonic navigation. If correlated with Latimer ledger notation, this represents early evidence of cognitive mapping within enslaved communities. No full manuscript was ever published. Evans withdrew from her program shortly after. Her forwarding address is listed simply as unknown. The digitized images from 2003 added further layers of speculation. Infrared scanning detected residues of mineral pigment within the indentations, traces of charcoal or iron oxide. The conservation report notes may indicate drawing executed directly on ledger page prior to inscription. Position suggests removal of second sheet formerly placed above. In other words, the parchment described in the ledger may have pressed its imprint into the paper below. The handwriting above it, the overseer's record, might have been written later, unknowingly tracing over what had been drawn there first. Each new examination opens more questions than it answers. Was the drawing truly made by children? Was it a fragment of play, a coded message, or something older, a retained memory translated into symbol? The archives cannot confirm. They only preserve coincidence. The folklore of the Edisto settlements maintains that songs once marked direction hymns like Wade in the Water served as both prayer and map. Singers used rhythm to recall crossings, pauses to mark obstacles. 4 beats, 3 beats, silence. The same cadence appears in Billings' recording, though none of the participants identified it as intentional. The pattern could be accident. It could also be inheritance. The facts, cold as they stand, resist romantic explanation. A ledger, a letter, a recording, a missing field worker, dates align by chance. Yet across these accidents runs a single theme: creation followed by disappearance. Every record that mentions the children ends incomplete. Every account of the field worker breaks off mid-journey. Every artifact left behind bears a trace of something unseen pressed into its surface. No document calls it haunting. None use the word spirit. Still, the silence that threads between them feels deliberate, as if someone once tried to speak and history itself stepped back, leaving only the shape of the sound behind. The Charleston Courier, dated June 4, 1841, carried a notice almost invisible at the bottom of its second page. The type was small, the phrasing routine surrounded by advertisements for sugar and indigo. It read, "Run away from the estate of H. Latimer. 3 Negro children, names Peter Rose and Jacob, presumed in company." That was all. No age, no description, no mention of relatives or reward. The right margin of the paper had been torn, and what may have followed was lost. No later issue printed any correction or report of capture. In the city's records, the entry is filed under absconded property resolved. It is one of hundreds of such announcements, and yet it ends differently. No owner filed a claim. No plantation agent renewed the ad. The case dissolves into silence, left unfinished like a letter never sent. A century later, among the Works Progress Administration narratives, an old woman named Millie spoke of 3 children who drew the way out when nobody else could. Her story was taken down in Walterboro in 1937 by Joseph Billings, who wrote in his margin possible reference to folklore of lost map. She said they scratched the pattern on dirt floors with sticks humming all the while. They gone before the flood came, she told him, but that drawing's still down there. He marked her statement as superstitious, though he did not strike it out. Another record, this time from the Freedmen's Bureau, dated 1867, lists the petition of a woman claiming descent from Rose, former property of H. Latimer. The Bureau clerk's note reads, "Oral testimony without proof, claim denied." The woman's signature, shaky and incomplete, ends in a smear that might be water, might be tears. On the facing page, another hand, perhaps the same clerk in haste, wrote, "Locals mention unmarked ground near Edisto Bend, unverified burial. No coordinates, no attempt to confirm. Only a date, May 6, 1867. In the folklore collected through the same region, the story shifts. There are no names, only the river children, 3 small shadows seen walking across shallow water at dusk. They never speak. They never age. Their reflection appears, but never their faces. The tale warns children not to wander after sunset, or the map will open under your feet. In 1938, a field worker in neighboring Dorchester County recorded a variation. "They draw their road so good even death can't erase it." He added no comment. Colleton County Court archives contain a record from September 1842, the sworn statement of a ferryman, Jebediah Rooks, who claimed to hear crying like children's voices near midnight along the old ferry road. His deposition lasted 4 lines. The magistrate's notation at the bottom states witness appears intoxicated. The case was dismissed the same day. The paper bears a pale brown stain in its corner described in the catalog as unidentified watermark. In African American spiritual traditions of the coastal South, water carries dual meaning, a place of passage and a place of memory. Songs gathered in the Sea Islands at the start of the 20th century still preserve verses unknown elsewhere. One begins, "The Lord laid down the line, children followed in time, repeating that phrase 3 times before falling into hums." The singer's name in the 1905 transcript is listed as Martha J., her birthplace Colleton County, her age unknown. Musicologists classify it as variant of Wade in the Water, but the melody rises and falls in uneven measures 4/3 and pause the same cadence that hums beneath Billings's 1937 recording. Military files from the War Department 1864 include a field report from the 3rd U.S. Colored Infantry stationed along the lower Edisto. Among the scattered notes is a diary kept by Corporal Amos Reed. His entry for March 9th reads, "Men uneasy, refuse to camp near Old Ferry Crossing. Locals say children's ghosts there. At night ground vibrates like drumming." 2 pages later, another entry in the same hand. "Still hear it. Sounds like heartbeat." Then the diary stops. The next dated entry is 12 days later, written in a different pen, and says only, "River crossed without loss." By then, the folklore of the freed settlements had turned the story into warning and prayer. Parents told their young never to laugh near Stillwater. "It remember you," they said. "It hold your name." Missionaries dismissed these sayings as fear. Yet their own journals carry traces of respect, even reluctance. In 1870, Reverend Thomas Healy of the American Missionary Association wrote, "They refuse to destroy scraps found beneath floorboards, call them the drawings of those who left. I cannot persuade them to burn such objects." His entry ends mid-sentence. A Bureau map of 1872 traces the resettlement of freedmen communities along the Edisto. Beyond the main road, faint dotted lines run south unlabeled. The cartographer J.N. Warner added a note in the margin, "Heard song among locals about Children's Path. Melody resembles river flow. Flooding later damaged the map's lower half. The dots fade into smears of ink like tributaries." Within the same oral records, an elderly singer explained that hymns once carried directions. Every verse pointed somewhere. The pause between lines marked a crossing. When she was asked who taught her, she smiled and said, "Nobody. The river hum it to me." The interviewer marked her response as mythological in character. 2 years later, that interviewer's notebook was found floating near the same bridge where Billings would vanish. Fact and folklore mirror each other, one reflecting the other's silence. The written record says, "Runaway lost, presumed drowned." The spoken memory answers, "Gone walking, still moving, never found because never stopped." Each corrects the other. Neither erases the other. The ledger lists 3 children unaccounted for. The song calls them the 3 who kept the way. At the edge of the Edisto floodplain, geography itself begins to echo. Surveyors from 1890 write that the river has changed course, forming a crescent pool where rice fields once stood. During drought, they found rows of carved posts beneath the water, not tree roots but cut wood arranged in arcs. Their report says, "Function unclear, possibly fencing." The wood contained no growth rings, its center hollow smooth as bone. Local residents called the place the Walking Map. Among the WPA narratives of 1937, a woman known only as Aunt Millie told of dreaming children holding light in jars walking over the water. When asked how she recognized them, she said, "Because they hum the song that find the living." The interviewer noted that she grew restless and ended the session. The recording ends with her voice fading into quiet tapping 4/3 pause. By the start of the 20th century, historians had dismissed such accounts as superstition. Academic journals referred to them as survivals of African animism. Yet the practice of leaving candles along the flood banks each spring persisted. Families said the lights were for those still walking home. The act had no church sanction, no written name. It was simply what one did when the river rose to remind the water that memory still lives on land. And somewhere between them, between line and echo, between proof and prayer, the children's map continues to unfold, not on parchment, but in rhythm, in silence, in the way the river bends, the same each year, no matter how many times it floods. The plantation ledger from 1841 states plainly, 3 missing from the quarters presumed taken by river. The Charleston Courier repeats it a few days later, compressing grief into print. No survivors were found. The line ends there as though silence were proof. Yet a century afterward, the WPA recording of Rebecca begins with words that refuse to end. But the drums still answered that night. One voice closes the door. Another knocks from the other side. In the archives, the historian's tone stays firm, clerical, distant. The Freedmen's Bureau entry calls it an isolated incident resolved by nature. But the oral memory whispers back. The water carried the names and gave them to the next rain. One side demands evidence. The other offers echo. Neither cancels the other. They exist like two shadows cast by the same flame, both visible, both real, neither identical. A bureau clerk in 1867 writes a line meant to end a rumor. Informant unreliable claims to have seen children walking after the flood. The next sheet, dated 2 days later, belongs to the same informant, transcribed by another hand. I saw them in the field when rain was falling. They was singing quiet. The two documents are stapled together in the same folder as if the system itself could not decide what to believe. One marked unverified, the other inadmissible. The War Department report from 1864 notes, ground tremors recorded by colored troops, Edisto outpost, cause unknown. The following page begins with follow-up investigation and stops mid-sentence. The rest was torn away long ago. A penciled annotation added later reads, lost during flood 1940. In folklore, that absence became its own story the night the ground remembered marching. Elders sang of a hum that shook the roots of trees. In their verse, they gone to the water, they ain't come back, but the land keep walking. When compared with the military drummer's cadence of that year, the rhythm is nearly identical. On the Bureau's 1872 map, a dotted line curls through the marsh before stopping abruptly at the river bend. The legend labels it Unverified Trail. In the margin, a surveyor adds, locals refuse to continue mapping. Site avoided after sundown. That same year, a testimony from a freedman named Israel Prince describes the same location. We don't walk that way no more. That's their road now. Asked whose road he meant, he said, the little ones who crossed first. The map and the voice oppose each other but describe the same space, each giving the other shape. In 1842, the overseer's deposition concludes, search conducted, no sign of passage. Beneath the final word, an irregular ink blot spreads outward like a dark petal. When magnified under spectral light, faint letters appear below the blot, the start of a word, re, the rest obscured. One archivist suggested it may have been returned. The word repeats elsewhere in oral accounts, in songs and rumor. They returned by walking in the water. No one knows who said it first, but every version ends with the same rhythm, 4 beats, 3 beats, pause. A missionary's journal from 1870 records his attempt to teach hymns among freed people. One woman, unnamed, refused to stop humming during service. His note reads, subject non-compliant persisted in unorthodox melody. The melody itself was never written down. In graphite scrawled at the page edge, perhaps by another observer, someone added, tune resembles wade in the water. 50 years later, the same tune reappears under a new name, the Map Song. A woman explains on record its start where they vanish and end where they home. The tape ends halfway through her hum. The archivist writes, recording incomplete, possible malfunction. Broken record. Broken witness. Another field note from 1868 lists, reports of 3 children's spirits sighted along riverbank disproved. The next line reads, investigator withdrawn due to illness. 1 page later, a new entry appears, replacement agent deceased, cause undetermined. The community version tells it differently. He followed the hum too far. Corporal Amos Reed, in his Civil War diary, describes the same hum in plainer words. Heard drums beyond camp perimeter. No band present. Sound like heartbeat. A later historian's footnote insists, likely echo from nearby gunboat, but Reed wrote it 3 more times. Ground hums. Still humming. Can't sleep. The ground sings. His last entry ends with the words, river keeps time. In the Sea Islands Oral Archive, an old singer's verse answers him directly. If you hear the ground sing, don't answer it not calling your name. The Bureau files also contain a petition dated March 1868. We request confirmation of burial place for the 3 children of Rose lost to the flood. The response from the district officer record, incomplete, no such case found. 1 year later, the same petition reappears in a different hand on newer paper with 1 added word beneath the signature, returned. The archivist's note, purpose unclear. In 1937, Joseph Billings wrote his final field log describing Rebecca's testimony. The entry ends. Subject stopped humming, looked over shoulder, said, they still walking. His next line is unfinished. The wax cylinder skips a brief gap of silence. Later, sound engineers labeled it mechanical fault, but in the waveform the pattern shows order, pulse, 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 rest. It matches the rhythm of the Edisto songs. At nearly the same time, Professor H.C. Grant published a paper denying that enslaved people used symbolic cartography. His appendix includes a photocopy of the Holmes ledger describing figures of rivers and cabins drawn in charcoal. In the photocopy margin, a faint note appears in another handwriting, "Who drew this?" The question remains unanswered. When Grant died in 1952, his unfinished draft contained one final handwritten line. Perhaps they did not draw to escape, but to remember the way back. The next page is missing. Only one word remains pressed into the blank sheet beneath "returned." Every document here contradicts another. Each side of history speaks in its own language, one of ink and formality, the other of voice and persistence. The contradiction is the only consistency. Ledger flood took them. Song River carried them home. Report: no survivors were found. Memory. The drums still answered that night. File case dismissed. Folklore. The ground keeps walking. The archivist sees gaps as error. The singer calls them truth. The paper ends its sentence with a period. The voice ends with breath. Between them, an invisible rhythm continues, the hum between lines, the silence between beats. That is where the children remain, not vanished, not found, simply existing in the contradiction. The historian measures distance in dates. The community measures it in echoes. Each is certain of what the other cannot prove. And yet, as the record spins, literal, metaphorical, each silence returns. The broken line hums again. The word reappears through time, faint but legible, returned. The contradiction endures because the story never finished. The river keeps time. The ground hums. The drums still answer. The Reconstruction map of 1872, drawn under the seal of the Freedmen's Bureau, stretches across brittle parchment like a web of veins. Rivers twist through counties that no longer share the same names. Dotted trails branch outward, marking the migration of freed people from the coast inland. One faint path begins near the lower Edisto and ends midstream, its ink dissolved into the blue of the river. The legend beside it reads, "Unrecorded terrain." That is where the Latimer plantation once stood. To the Bureau, it was a gap, an unmapped space between jurisdiction and swamp. To those who lived there, it was where songs still breathed when the fields went quiet. The Bureau's pen recorded departure. The people's voices remembered return. In March of 1873, an agent named Samuel Tyner wrote from Charleston to his supervisor. The locals claim a strange music carries across the Edisto at dusk, like humming or drumming from beneath the bank. I have not observed it myself, yet men refuse to plow near the old tract after sundown. His final line changes tone. I cannot dismiss what the dogs refuse to cross. The letter folded into his field journal ends without signature. It was filed and forgotten until the 1980s. That same year, a freedwoman known only as Martha J. sang for visiting missionaries a short hymn she called "Follow the Line." The transcription, recorded in fragile pencil, reads, "Follow the line. Lord, mark it mine. River know. Children go. Follow the line." No melody survives. No other version is known. In the museum's index, the song appears beside the word "fragmentary." The Charleston Mercury March, 1875, reports heavy flooding on the lower Edisto. High water reveals the brick foundations of a forgotten settlement, wooden fragments found bearing carved markings. The editor's tone is confident, dismissive. Local Negroes attribute them to sorcery. Scholars identify the remains as a rice storehouse. Yet in a private letter written that same month, the editor confesses to his wife, "I lingered near the water after inspection. There was humming, faint but steady, as though from within the ground. I told no one." The record and the confession stand side by side, one public, one buried, mirror and shadow. Fact offers surface. Folklore waits beneath it. In a letter home from 1864, Corporal Amos Reed of the 3rd U.S. Colored Infantry writes, "The men fear the swamp at night. They say children walk there. I heard nothing but the wind, yet I would not sleep by the water." 2 days later, his handwriting tightens. "Last night ripples came without breeze. The river beats like drum." The folk memory of the Sea Islands preserves a verse that answers him across time. "Walk light, walk slow, the water know, don't break the Lord's shadow." To ethnographers, such lyrics signify superstition. To the singers, they are directions, part hymn, part map. Another Bureau field report from 1869 describes a nocturnal gathering of freed people near the Edisto, accompanied by rhythmic humming and drumming. The agent concludes, likely superstition honoring drowned kin, no interference required. Yet decades later, descendants identified that gathering as lighting the line, an annual vigil for those who took the water road. They placed oil lamps along the floodplain and left them burning through the night. It ain't for mourning, one elder said. It's for reminding. The migration maps of Reconstruction chart outward movement, freed families traveling north and west, marking progress through distance. But oral accounts move in the opposite direction. Elders speak of return, not escape. One 1937 testimony says simply, they walked away to learn the way back. A teacher's letter from 1868 adds another thread. She wrote from Walterboro, my pupils trace lines upon their desks when lessons grow still. One child drew a river over and over, stopping at the same curve each time. When I asked its name, he said, home before the water. Her supervisor underlined the phrase and added the note, delusional symbol, correct with discipline. Yet 40 years later, a hymn surfaces in the region titled, Home Before the Water. Its first lines echo the child's words, home before the water, cross before the cry. Map me in mercy. Let this road not die. The melody is undocumented, but the rhythm remains constant, 4 beats, 3 pause. Fact calls it a record of reconstruction. Folklore calls it a return to origin. Both describe motion, both hold truth. The Columbia Standard, 1878, runs a brief column about curious lamp rituals along the river, dismissing them as vestiges of pagan belief. The journalist concludes smugly, those who claim to see lights upon the water mistake phosphorescence for spirit. The next year, his obituary appears, drowned while crossing Edisto after storm. Folklore rewrites the ending. In a spiritual recorded in 1901, a woman named Rachel sings, the man who mocked the light now hums below. His paper gone, his name still flow. No annotation connects the two, but the dates align like reflection and image. In the census of 1870, several families near the old Latimer tract list their occupation as mapmaker's helper. No official cartographer worked there. Historians call it clerical error, perhaps field hand misheard by the enumerator. But oral tradition remembers differently. We were helping make the map for the ones not home yet, one descendant said in 1938. The map you don't draw, you hum. To the Bureau mapping was geography. To the people mapping was memory. Both were survival. Field report from Colleton County, 1871, records a complaint from settlers, persistent humming heard at night, source unidentified. The agent attributes it to wind and frogs. In 1937, a WPA recorder standing in the same location writes in his notebook, steady rhythm in the reeds, 4 beats, 3 silence, feels deliberate. 2 witnesses 70 years apart describing the same sound. The first dismisses it as nature, the second calls it memory. In the folk imagination, the children who vanished did not drown. They kept the map alive. In Bureau language, they remain missing, presumed dead. Fact records disappearance, folklore records endurance, the same event seen through opposite mirrors, one reflecting loss, one reflecting persistence. Reverend Josiah Booth, visiting from Savannah in 1885, described in his diary a riverside vigil. Dozens stood silent by the water lamps at their feet. When I asked what they waited for, a woman said, for the map to open again. Booth called the practice superstition of the uneducated. Yet his sermon the following morning opened with Psalm 77. Thy way is in the sea, and thy path in the great waters. Fact labels the flood that erased the plantation as disaster. Faith names it doorway. Fact lists property loss. Folklore lists souls reclaimed. The Bureau maps end where the river begins. The songs begin where the Bureau stopped drawing. Dream accounts collected by the WPA in the 1930s extend the story further. Descendants described dreams in which children appeared holding folded scraps of paper. When the dreamers opened them, the folds revealed rivers curved and endless. Upon waking, they heard a hum that stayed for several minutes, neither wind nor blood nor sleep. One woman told the interviewer, they showing the way not back but through. He labeled the testimony psychological artifact of trauma. The transcript ends with the line, subject ceased speaking, audible humming in background. A final letter survives from Bureau Agent Tyner, written May 1874. Flood has washed away the last upright post of the old Latimer house. Locals call it justice. I call it gravity. His signature is faint as if written during rain. The page bears a watermark that resembles branching lines or veins or a map. That same year, a new verse was added to follow the line. Post fall down, river wide, they cross in song, we wait this side. History closes the file with one conclusion: nature reclaimed the ruin. Folklore opens it with another: the ruin remembered itself. When these fragments are read together, ledgers, letters, songs, dreams, they form a mirrored page. Ink bleeds through from one side to the other, words ghosting backward through the paper. The Bureau's handwriting looks like the shadow of the singer's hum. Each record reflects the other's silence. Without the written fact, the song would drift away. Without the song, the fact would rot in dust. Fact names the act disappearance. Folklore names it return. And somewhere between those words, between what the ledger declares and what the voice insists, the children's map unfolds again, invisible but felt a reflection trembling on water that remembers both sides at once. The archive ends where sound begins. The final line of the WPA field log, the one transcribed from Rebecca's voice, reads, "Subject paused, looked away and said, 'They still walking?' After that, nothing. The wax cylinder keeps turning, capturing 22 seconds of pure silence. But silence, like the river, is never still. When technicians digitized the recording decades later, they found a pulse beneath the static 4 faint knocks, 3 slow beats, then a pause. The same rhythm written in the 1841 ledger, the same breath that echoes through every song, every letter, every page that ends before its thought does. The pattern survives where language cannot. The official files close neatly. The Freedmen's Bureau entry from 1874 marks the end of the case, all claims regarding missing minors resolved or unsubstantiated. Beneath that final line in graphite, so faint it's barely visible, someone had written a single word: returned. The handwriting doesn't match the clerk's. No one claimed authorship. The archivist logged it, noted it, and turned the page. The next file begins a different story. The children's names never appear again. But in the oral record, endings do not hold. The song does not stop. It fades. One woman interviewed in 1937 said simply, "When we stop singing, they sing under us." The field worker asked her what she meant. She smiled and whispered, "You'll hear it when the ground get quiet." She was right. After 1940, the river rose again, drowning the remnants of the old road. The bridge where Billings vanished was rebuilt farther upstream. The soil of the old tract cracked into spirals, when dry spirals that locals now call the river's fingerprints. Fact decays, folklore lingers, the written dissolves, the remembered repeats. The hook began with an image, a parchment drawn in charcoal river's cabins, no names. A map without letters, only movement. A record that did not describe it remembered. That same image returns here quieter. The parchment never found, but its echo carried on through generations, translated into sound, into humming, into the steady beat of people walking away but not gone. Every account, every hymn, every whisper folds back toward that drawing, the same dark lines beneath the floorboard. The same curve of the river pressed into the paper, like breath. In 1962, when archivist Charles M. Rivers examined the Holmes ledger for restoration, he wrote in his memo, "Entry of unusual phrasing, possibly reference to a child's drawing. No related document recovered. Suggest move to folklore collection." Then on the back of his own report, written in smaller handwriting, he added, 4 knocks, 3 pauses, heard while reading. There is no date for that annotation, only the pattern. Silence becomes its own evidence. Each broken record, each missing line, each vanished witness, all of them align in rhythm. It's there in the military report that ends mid-sentence. It's there in the newspaper torn at the edge. It's there in every oral story that stops just before the last word. 4 beats, 3 beats, silence. The same cycle, loss, echo, return. One can trace it through time like a pulse beneath the nation's skin. In 1872, the Bureau's map called the Edisto Tract unrecorded terrain. In 1937, the same space appears in a WPA transcript as haunted by hum. In 2003, the imaging report of the ledger describes indentations consistent with curved channels. Nothing connects these entries except rhythm, curved, unfinished, insistent. The pattern itself has become the record. In the collection of coastal spirituals, one forgotten verse closes the hymn, "Follow the line." "When the world forget the river, don't." The ethnographer wrote beside it. Singer refused to stop repeating this phrase. each repetition quieter until inaudible. That is what the story has become, not a crescendo, but a diminuendo, a soft receding toward stillness. The hum fades but never disappears. The silence grows but it vibrates. It's not emptiness, it's endurance. At the South Carolina Historical Society, the Holmes ledger rests behind glass. The cover is cracked, its spine repaired twice the color uneven. Visitors can view only the binding, the pages are too fragile. When light strikes it at the right angle, faint outlines ripple through the paper, the ghosts of lines drawn beneath ink. Conservators call it optical interference. Local visitors call it proof. Across the hallway, a digital station plays the old recordings. Track 17, Rebecca Walterborough, July 22, 1937. The static begins, then breathing, then a hum cut short. If you raise the volume, you can hear something beneath, not words, not notes, only vibration, steady and circular. The technicians cataloged it as background noise. To anyone else, it sounds like footsteps on wet soil. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. In 1987, researcher Maria Evans visited the Edisto floodplain. Her notebook, later found in her university archive, describes the site in simple detail. No structure remains. Fragments of brick, charred posts at edge of water, ground uneven. Her final paragraph reads, "Heard low rhythmic humming near dusk. Sound receded toward river. 4 beats. 3. Pause." She never published her paper. 2 months later, she resigned from the program. Her file ends mid-sentence. It's not the first time a witness vanished into stillness. Billings left behind a blank space where his field notes should have been. The teacher's letter stops after home before the water. The ferryman's deposition ends with heard cries near the reeds and nothing more. The absence has become the continuity silence as connective tissue. The story does not resolve, it breathes. The facts close with neat punctuation. The folklore exhales. Every report that ended in unsubstantiated carries the hum of another truth, quieter, unrecorded, still alive. The Bureau speaks case concluded. The River Answers case continued. The historian says no survivors were found. The singer replies, but the drums still answered that night. To listen closely is to notice that the distance between then and now has rhythm. The flood, the hum, the missing word, the breath. The same pattern repeated like handwriting across generations. If one lays the waveform of the 1937 recording beside the scanned image of the 1841 ledger, their shapes almost align, rising, falling, returning to quiet. Paper remembers sound. Sound remembers ink. History like the river loops. There is no revelation at the end, only recognition. The parchment in the hook was never meant to survive. It was meant to echo. The drums are still there, though. No one plays them. They're not made of wood or hide anymore. They're the soft percussion of memory against forgetting. Every drop of water striking soil becomes another beat in the same song. Every footstep near the Edisto repeats it 4, 3, pause. What began as a charcoal drawing beneath a floorboard has become a sound the land itself hums. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. Stand by the river long enough and you'll hear it, not loud, not spectral, only steady, patient, familiar. A rhythm too soft to be noise, too constant to be coincidence. The silence itself has learned to keep time. The ledger still exists. It is housed today at the South Carolina Historical Society, Charleston accession number HC2117, cataloged as Rice Plantation Ledger, 1839 to 1843, with unusual marginal note. The book rests in a controlled climate case, its cracked spine wrapped in linen. Visitors cannot touch it. The page containing the 1841 entry, small parchment discovered beneath floorboard, drawn in charcoal figures of rivers and cabins. No words, no names, remains open under protective glass. Every few years, conservators measure humidity, adjust light, replace the archival box. Nothing new appears on the page. Yet the faint pressure marks are still there. Shallow curves, like river channels pressing through the paper. Under raking light, they gleam slightly as if the ink has memory. The wax cylinder from 1937, Rebecca Walterborough, July 22nd, sits in the Library of Congress, fragile and fractured. Its grooves are cracked near the midpoint, the hum skipping, then resuming 4, 3, pause. When engineers cleaned the surface in 2010, they found residue from mold and dust, but the pattern of rhythm remained untouched. The official metadata labels it unidentified tonal sequence, possibly environmental noise. The missing pages from the Bureau reports are still missing. The military diary of Corporal Amos Reed ends where it always ended. The Charleston Courier microfilm still carries its torn edge, the part where the reward amount once was. The fragments persist perfectly incomplete, their silence still intact. Across a century and a half, none of the primary witnesses remain. The overseer, the ferryman, the teacher, the soldier, the bureau clerk, the field workers, all gone. What remains is a pattern of repetition. The phrase returned scribbled in margins by unknown hands, the same rhythm found in song and soil, in silence. When researchers from the University of South Carolina revisited the site of the Latimer plantation in 2003, they found nothing but sediment. The Edisto had shifted south again, consuming what was left of the embankment. No visible brick, no foundation stones. But the ground beneath the water contained higher traces of iron oxide, suggesting burn residue, the kind produced when wood is scorched but not fully burned. The official excavation report ends with no definitive conclusion. A local fisherman interviewed during the dig said he sometimes heard a low vibration when the tide turned. Like drumming, he told them, "You can't record it, you just feel it in your chest." The archives do not mention that testimony. History in its precision tends to preserve absence more carefully than presence. It keeps the wound clean, the silence labeled. But in the oral memory of the region, the story refuses to stay buried. The elders still call that bend of river the line. They say when fog rises before dawn, you can see shapes, not bodies, just movement crossing from one current to another. Some bring flowers, some whisper prayers, some leave stones. None claim belief. They call it respect. The institutions call it anomaly. The descendants call it continuity. In this distance between archive and memory lies the quiet heart of the story. The ledger's ink cannot confirm what the songs insist upon. The Bureau's maps show where the freed people went, but not where they dreamed. The reporters printed no survivors found, but the ground still hums. The same 4-3 pause rhythm recurs wherever silence lasts long enough to listen. It lives in the static of the recording, in the hum of the soil, in the flow of the river when it touches the roots of cypress trees. The story began with a lost parchment drawn by hands too young to sign their names. It moved through centuries of handwriting, cataloging, guessing, denying. It ends here, not with resolution but with recognition. Every historian who approaches the file repeats the same pattern. They look, they listen, they hear nothing, and yet they write about the silence. That is the echo history, trying to describe the sound that lives beneath it. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. The drums are not real anymore. They are memory's percussion time striking against forgetting. The water that drowned their story has become the voice that keeps it. When it rains along the Edisto, the rhythm returns, 4-3. Pause, the same beat that began under a cabin floor nearly 2 centuries ago. Maybe it was never about a map that led to freedom. Maybe it was a freedom that became the map. Maybe the children were not trying to leave. Maybe they were trying to stay, to mark a way back for the rest of us who would forget the shape of home. The archivists still handle the ledger with gloves. The recordings are played rarely, always behind glass. Yet the story they hold refuses to end inside their boxes. It escapes every time someone reads the word returned. It hums through every speaker when the static settles between notes. The river, indifferent yet exact, keeps repeating the same motion, carrying sediment, carrying memory, erasing and remaking the same lines the children once drew. Nothing is permanent except the echo. No one can say with certainty what happened in 1841. There is no proof of a drawing, no proof of a song, only imprints, only rhythm, only silence behaving like remembrance. That may be enough. Maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe we did. Because history too can drown not from water but from certainty. What remains is not evidence but echo. And if silence is what endures, then silence is what speaks.